Somewhere on the road east out of Fort Bascom, an army picket stopped a line of ox carts and asked the drivers a question they could not answer. They had no permit. So the soldiers turned the carts around, hauled them back to the post, and did what soldiers do with a suspicious wagon. They wrote down everything inside it. That list survives: 200 pounds of cornmeal, 500 pounds of Mexican hard bread, 35 or 40 butcher knives, 9 files, some iron hoops, several pounds of lead, about 5 pounds of powder, and 16 elongated balls in .58 caliber. Read it again. The most dangerous cargo on the southern plains was mostly bread. Number 6 was a sealed box, 100 pieces, stamped Army issue, sitting in a grocer's cart where it had no business being. And number 1 was out shooting the United States Army in the field while the Army was still reloading. These are the 15 things New Mexican traders carried east to the Comanche. Every one of them legal to own, every one of them a federal crime to hand over. Hit subscribe because this list gets heavier the closer we get to number 1. Let's count them down. Number 15, the files. 9 of them, listed on the Fort Bascom manifest between the shirts and the vermilion, as ordinary as the candy and the letter paper stacked beside them. A file is the least dramatic object a man can own. It sharpens a plow blade. It trues a horseshoe. It takes the burr off a piece of scrap iron and turns it into something with an edge. In a New Mexican village, a file was a tool you borrowed from a neighbor. Carried east across the Llano, it was a step in a process, and the finished product of that process was not a horseshoe. Nobody in Santa Fe would have looked twice at a man buying files. That is the whole trick of this list. The object was never the crime. The direction of travel was. Number 14, iron hoops. They appear on the same seized manifest, and they are worth pausing on, because a barrel hoop is not cargo hardware when it is listed as trade stock. It is the merchandise. A hoop is a band of soft iron, curved, thin, about as threatening as a belt buckle. Cut it, heat it, work it against one of those 9 files, and it becomes arrow iron. The southern plains had no ironworks. Every piece of metal in Comancheria arrived from somewhere else, and a barrel that fell apart in a New Mexican yard could be worth more in pieces on the Llano than it ever was holding flour. Legal to make, legal to sell, legal to haul as far as the edge of the settlements, and a federal offense 1 mile past it. Number 13, steel arrow points. Not raw metal this time, but the finished article, manufactured in the settlements and carried east by the cartload alongside the knives, the tomahawks, and the lances. Think about what that means. The workshops of New Mexico were producing arrowheads for a weapon the settlements of Texas were terrified of. A steel point holds an edge that flint cannot. It punches through hide, through wool, through the layered buffalo shield that could turn a rifle ball. Every one of them was made by a man who knew exactly who would be shooting it. There was no ambiguity in that trade and no way to pretend otherwise afterwards. The point was lawful goods in the shop where it was hammered. It became a crime the moment it changed hands on the plain. Number 12, butcher knives. 35 or 40 of them in a single seized load, and knives are the oldest currency in this entire story. When Governor Juan Bautista de Anza set the terms of the Comanche peace in the 1780s, he fixed an exchange rate, and he wrote it in iron. 2 iron knives for 1 buffalo hide, 13 hides for an average horse. That was the founding arithmetic of the whole trade, set by a colonial governor, in writing as official policy. A butcher knife skins a buffalo. It also does everything else a knife does. Nobody ever seriously tried to ban them, because banning knives would have ended the trade entirely, and the trade was the only thing holding the peace together. The tool was never the offense. The handover was. Number 11, tomahawks, named outright in the eastbound commodity lists, moving over the same trails as the sugar and the tobacco. The word carries a lot of Hollywood with it, so strip that away and look at the object. It is a hatchet. It splits kindling, it drives a stake, it breaks a bone. Blacksmiths in the Rio Grande Valley turned them out as a standard line of goods, the same way they turned out hinges and hose, and they sold openly in Taos to anybody with the money. Load a dozen into a carreta and point the oxen east, and the identical object became contraband under federal law. Same hatchet, same smith, same price. What changed was who took delivery. Step back from the list and look at the wagon itself. Here is that Fort Bascom manifest in full. 200 pounds of cornmeal, 500 pounds of Mexican hard bread, shelled corn, flour, tea, sugar, candy, letter paper, shirts, red and white flannel, one vest, calico, and ducking. And then, buried at the bottom, the knives, the files, the hoops, the caps, the lead, the powder, and the 16 balls. Run the ratio. 200 pounds of cornmeal against 5 pounds of powder. These men were grocers. They hauled bread across hundreds of miles of dry country and made their living on it, and somewhere in the load, every trip, sat a few pounds of something that could put them in a federal court. The myth says gun runners. The manifest says bakery, with a felony at the bottom of the cart. Back to the countdown. Number 10. Lance blades. Lances are listed plainly among the manufactured goods flowing east, and the division of labor here is worth understanding. The Comanche made the shaft. They knew what wood to cut, how long to season it, how to balance a weapon for a man riding at speed. What the plains could not produce was the head. Steel, forged, tempered, ground to a point. An object that requires a furnace, an anvil, and a smith who has spent years learning his trade. New Mexico had all three. So the settlement supplied the killing end of the finest cavalry lance on the continent and let the Comanche do the rest. The blade was ordinary goods in Las Vegas. It was contraband at Kitaqua. Number 9. Lead. Several pounds of it on the manifest, listed with about as much ceremony as the tea. Lead is the dullest metal in the world. Soft, gray, heavy, and completely useless until you melt it and pour it into a mold. Then it is the only thing that matters, because a rifle without lead is a badly made club. A man on the plains with powder and caps and no lead has one shot and then a very long walk. Several pounds of it is many, many shots. Of everything in that cart, lead was the item that turned a single firearm into a sustained problem, and it traveled under the same tarp as the sugar. No license needed to buy it in the settlements. Crossing the line with it was the offense. Number 8. Powder, about 5 pounds. It is the smallest line on the manifest, and it is the line that ends the argument. 5 pounds of black powder does not sound like much until you measure it out in charges, and then it is hundreds of them. This is the item no amount of explaining gets you past. A man can argue that knives are for skinning, files are for plows, hoops are for barrels, and a sympathetic official might even write it down that way. Nobody has ever found an agricultural use for gunpowder. When the picket read this line, the conversation was over. Powder was sold across the counter in every settlement in the territory. Carried east, it was the clearest evidence a prosecutor could ask for. Number 7. About 400 small percussion caps. Loose, never counted precisely, recorded only as about 400. A percussion cap is a thimble of copper the size of a grain of rice with a trace of fulminate inside it. It is the spark. Without it, powder and lead and a good rifle are 3 separate objects that do nothing at all. 400 caps is 400 moments when a hammer falls and something happens. They weigh almost nothing. A man can carry 1,000 in a coat pocket, and nobody searching a wagon finds them unless he knows to look. Of everything on this list, the caps were the easiest to hide and the hardest to justify. And they were perfectly legal to buy that same morning in the settlements, over a counter. Number 6. 1 box of army caps. 100 of them, sealed, and the manifest records them in exactly those words. Army caps. Stop and consider what that means. These were not caps a trader bought in a shop. They were government issue, packed for military use, sitting in the cart of a New Mexican grocer bound for the Comanche. The record does not say how they got there. It names no quartermaster, no clerk, no sergeant. Historians have long noted that this trade reached further up the chain than anyone wanted to admit, that merchants, officials, and men in uniform all had an interest in keeping it alive. But the specific route those 100 caps took out of an army store and into that wagon is not documented, and this script is not going to invent it. What is documented is the box, and the box should not have been there. So, where was the law in all this? It was everywhere, and it did almost nothing. In 1834, Congress made the Indian Trade and Intercourse Act permanent. It defined Indian country, barred settlement, and prohibited the sale of arms and alcohol to the tribes. The penalty was not gentle. Trade in Indian country without a license, and you forfeited every item of merchandise in your possession, and you owed $500 on top of it. That was a ruinous sum, and it failed completely. The Spanish had tried licensing before the Americans. The Mexicans tried after them. The Comancheros mainly ignored all of it. Here is how thoroughly it failed. Jose Piedad Tafoya, the most famous trader of them all, was carrying a legal permit signed on October 9, 1865, by Felipe Delgado, Superintendent of Indian Affairs. Back to the list. Number 5. 16 elongated balls, .58 caliber. Here is where the trade stops being deniable. Everything above this number could be argued. A file is a tool, a knife skins meat, lead is lead, powder, at a stretch, clears stumps. But an elongated ball in .58 caliber is not a general-purpose object. It is a conical rifle bullet, shaped to take the rifling of a military barrel, and .58 was the standard caliber of the American infantry musket of the Civil War era. 16 of them in a grocer's wagon means one thing. Somebody out on the Llano had a rifle chambered for military ammunition, and somebody in New Mexico was keeping him supplied. This is not a hunting round. It was designed by an army for an army to be fired at men. The picket who wrote that line into the manifest understood exactly what he was looking at, and so did everyone who read it afterwards. 16 bullets is a small number. It is also a receipt, and receipts are what convict people. The ball itself broke no law sitting in a crate in Las Vegas. It became a federal crime the moment the cart turned east. Number 4. The muskets. Firearms are named outright in the Comanchero commodity lists, and to understand how significant that is, you have to go back to the beginning. In 1786, at the trade fair that followed the treaty negotiations at Pecos Pueblo, the Comanche brought more than 600 hides, many loads of meat and tallow, and came away with 3 guns. 3. That was the opening of the arms channel, conducted in the open, under a treaty, with a colonial governor's blessing. 80 years later, the same channel was moving muskets in quantity to bands at war with the United States, and the men carrying them were the grandsons of the men at that first fair. Nothing about the route had changed. The carts still creaked east over the same trails. The traders still waited days, sometimes weeks, at the same springs for the Comanche to appear. Many of them still spoke the language fluently. Only the cargo had grown teeth. A musket was a legitimate article of commerce in every settlement in the territory. It became a federal offense the instant it changed hands on the plain. Number 3. Pistols. They sit in the commodity lists right beside the muskets, and a handgun on the plains is a specific kind of tool. A rifle is for distance. A pistol is for the moment a man is already among you at the gallop, close enough to see his face. That is precisely the range at which Comanche horsemen preferred to fight, and it is why the revolver mattered more here than almost anywhere else on the continent. Then the design caught up with the problem. The Colt Frontier revolver was eventually chambered for the .44-40 cartridge, the same round fed by the Winchester lever gun. One kind of ammunition, 2 different weapons. On a plain hundreds of miles from any resupply, that is not a convenience. That is the difference between fighting for a week and fighting for an afternoon. Every one of those revolvers was legal property in Santa Fe. Carried east, it was contraband under federal law, and every man in the cart knew it. It ended, and it ended fast. On July 28, 1872, Colonel Ranulph Mackenzie marched 272 troopers, 12 officers, and 20 Tonko-Wau scouts into the heart of the Comanche area. He was not guessing at the route. He was following a captured Comanchero named Polonia Ortiz, a man who had made that trip many times with a cart. That expedition covered close to 700 miles in about 5 weeks and opened 2 new routes across the Staked Plains, country the Army had never been able to cross. The trade was finished in 1872, broken by the military, by vigilantes, and by the destruction of the buffalo herds that had given both sides something worth trading. The men who had carried the goods east became the guides who led the Army back. Now the top 2. Number 2, the repeater and the 4440 cartridge that fed it. A word of caution before this one, because it matters. The Winchester Model 1873 does not appear on any surviving seized Comanchero manifest. What the record shows is the direction everything was heading. The 1873 was a lever-action carbine that held 11 cartridges in its magazine, and Plains warriors did acquire them. Set that against what the United States Army was carrying in the same years. The Army issued single-shot Springfields for frontier duty, 1 round, then reload. 11 against 1. That is not a marginal advantage. That is a different category of weapon, and it explains a great deal about why the Southern Plains took so long to subdue. Whether repeaters reached the Comanche through the Comanchero trade specifically, or through raids, or through other traders entirely, the record does not settle. What it settles is that they arrived. The rifle was a legal purchase anywhere in the United States. Putting one into the hands of a band at war with the government was not. Number 1, the Spencer repeating carbine. This one is not inference. This one is archaeology. Between 1998 and 2003, the Texas Historical Commission ran the Red River War Battle Sites Project, working the ground with metal detectors and satellite mapping. At Palo Duro Canyon alone, they recovered 3,700 metal artifacts, cartridges, cases, bullets, and metal projectile points scattered across roughly 30 square miles. Then they ran firearms identification analysis on all of it, matching firing pin marks and extractor marks back to the weapons that made them. Here is what the ground said. The Army was firing single-shot Springfield rifles and carbines. The Indians were firing Spencers. Read that again, because it inverts everything you were taught about this war. On September 28, 1874, when Mackenzie's 400 troopers came down into Palo Duro Canyon, the United States Army was the side that had to stop and reload. The object was never the crime. And by 1874, the object was out shooting the government that had banned it. Go back to that cart at Fort Bascom. 200 pounds of cornmeal, 500 pounds of bread, and buried underneath all of it, the powder, the lead, and the 16 bullets. Every item on this list was legal to make, legal to buy, legal to own, and a federal crime to hand over. The object was never the offense. The direction was. But the most dangerous thing in this whole trade was never in the cart at all. It was a 2-month permit, signed on October 9, 1865, by Felipe Delgado, Superintendent of Indian Affairs, authorizing Jose Piedad Tafoya to go out and trade with the Comanche. This trade did not run on outlaws. It ran on paper, issued by officials who knew exactly what would move underneath it. Of these 15, which one would you have stopped first? Leave it in the comments. And if you want more of the Frontier the Textbook Skip, subscribe.